Hello, it's Gabrielle Nicolay from SpeechKids and Raising Orchid Kids, where we teach little kids to talk and help parents understand their little kids. And today I am delighted to be joined by Argavan Nilforoush. Hi, Argavan.
Hi, Gabrielle. So nice to see you.
So nice to actually see you. We've talked several times before, but this is our first in-person, face-to-face meeting.
We have. I'm getting used to the video format myself.
Yay!
Yeah.
Argavan, you are a pediatric registered dietitian. And before we get too much further, I asked you off camera, but I'll ask you now on camera. What is the difference between a dietitian and a nutritionist?
Yes. And I'm very glad that people ask me that, because especially now, their nutrition is everywhere. And a lot of people call themselves nutrition professionals or certified this and certified that. But I think it's important for the public to understand when we use the credential RDN or RD, so registered dietitian nutritionist or registered dietitian, what does that actually mean? It means that we belong to a regulatory body. So someone to become a dietitian, and this is the difference between dietitian and anybody else who calls themselves a nutrition expert or food expert or health expert in nutrition, is that you need to go and do a 4-year minimum undergraduate program, and you need to graduate with a bachelor. So I grew up in Canada. I did my education there. So slight differences between the US and Canada, but otherwise very similar. So you get your bachelor, and then you have to apply for a very competitive internship program. And you can do, so I did mine in a clinical setting. I worked at a pediatric hospital in Toronto, Canada. And then after you complete your internship, some people go on to do postgraduate work. You need to be registered with your commission of dietetic registration. So each state has their own rules, but every registered dietitian needs to have that credential after their name. And then dietitians can go on to specialize in so many different areas. So you'll see them in community and clinical, you'll see media dietitians, corporate dietitians who work for the food industry. I mean, we're everywhere. And that's one of the things that I absolutely love about our profession.
It's very similar to, it's similar to speech, actually. It's like one of those things you have to know something about it before you start. It is a licensed health profession in our case. And yeah, you can go sort of from there wherever you want to go. Okay, so you've chosen my people, the small ones.
Yes.
And part of where I want to go today is talking about what is the role of, so a lot of what we deal with here on the in this place is we're raising orchid kids. So these are the highly sensitive kids. And when I say highly sensitive, I kind of mean they're sensitive everywhere, right? They're sensitive to the food they eat.
Yes.
They're sensitive to environmental kinds of, I'm going to say toxins kind of in air quotes, right? But like
it is. Yes,
seasonal
absolutely.
Allergies are a thing, sort of systemically.
Yes.
They can be sensitive. Of this population, we've got some kids who are diagnosed or maybe will be diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, as we're now calling it, which really sort of describes, we're not going to go too far into it here, but it describes a brain that has trouble paying attention to things it's not very interested in, and not any trouble paying attention to things it's very interested in. But it also comes with sort of some physical traits and some other kinds of things. Okay, you can go do your research on ADHD, but as regards dietetics, is that how you say it?
Yes, that's a profession. Yes.
And ADHD, what do you see from your seat?
Okay, so the beauty of studying children with ADHD is that it teaches us about all children. So as someone who works in pediatrics, parents will say, oh, my kid is okay. But then when you dig deeper, a lot of issues come up, right? So we find out about, like, they may report they sleep okay, but they're not getting a good quality sleep. They're still tired in the morning. They have, under eye bags. They're fussy or irritable. They need a nap by noon. So when you really dig deep, most of the kids that are born into this world, I feel, we have to work harder than we ever did before, unfortunately, but that is the reality. because they're being born to this world where there's a lot of, you mentioned toxins. So they're, depending on how they're born and the medication that they're on, and just the soil, the air, the water, right?
And can I
Stress
interrupt
level.
you for just a
Yes.
second? Because we're learning, this is a fairly new field. We're learning so much about even just kind of the birth environment. I mean, there's some research that's really interesting. I don't know if you want to discuss it here, but I have read some things about babies born via C-section versus vaginal delivery. There are some significant differences there. I don't know if you want to go into it or not.
Yes. I mean, you're right. And this is a very good point. So people often think about nutrition when their child is older, but it really starts preconception and then during pregnancy, and then depending on the labor delivery. So yes, just to summarize here, when babies are born via C-section, and we're not talking about emergency C-section because it's always about the health of the mom and the baby, but for a long time, elective C-sections were very trendy. And so people could choose to have a vaginal birth or a C-section. And they studied a lot of those children who were born via C-section, and their gut microbiome actually does differ tremendously than a child who's born via vaginally. And that is because the mode of delivery and the first exposure to the external environment. So if you think about a vaginal, you're getting that gush of the mom's microbiome before the baby exits into the world, where a baby who's born via C-section comes out of an incision in the mother's stomach. So the first exposure to the external environment are like the tools and the air and the clothing. And so babies who are born that way, and often they're put on antibiotics right away. And so is the mother, to prevent the risk of infection.
This is a big one.
It's a big one.
The number of kids that I see with speech and language, and you dig a little deeper in the history and you find out they had a massive round of antibiotics. Oh, and
right away.
Right away. And by the way, they're very picky eaters. And by the way, you know, we thought it was failure to thrive, but then they got over it, or whatever, you know, else happens to be going on in the history. Sorry, I'm jumping in because it makes me
it's so important. And this is why I always like to go back. Like people will say, well, 2 weeks ago, I'm like, let's go farther back. Okay, a year ago. And I'm like, no. Like I want to hear about pregnancy, labor, delivery, first year of life. And this is why it's so crucial to really dig deep, especially when you work with kids, because it's very telling from day one what that baby has been exposed to. So you have the C-section, you have most likely antibiotics right away. And then depending on the baby, if they're breastfed or formula fed, again, those are very different things. So it does affect the gut microbiome. And then depending on, you know, exposure to solids, first year of life, what did they eat, the mother's own health when they breastfed. So there are those multitude of factors right from day one. And then you look at babies who, like you see, 3, 4, 5, and it's been a few years of this has been brewing, right? And the children that I speak to. And so then you realize, okay, we have some work to do here.
Yeah. And it's so interesting. I mean, it's one of the things, I mean, my mind gets bent around a lot of things involving early development, because as I always say, like how we're not all bumping into each other, like idiots on the sidewalk is kind of amazing, right?
Yes.
But if we think about a developing brain, number one, there's so much we don't know about. I mean, we understand, yes, there's a connection between the gut and the brain. And if you're listening to this or watching this and you say to yourself, I didn't know that, go Google gut-brain axis. It's an emerging sort of thing, which we can go into a little bit more here too. But so there's this connection happening, and these are like the fundamental building blocks, you know, food, nutrients, all of this stuff is the fundamental building blocks for neurological growth and activity. And then if we're looking, but usually what we're doing is we're just looking at behavior. So we're looking at, to bring it back to our kiddo with ADHD, we're looking at him bouncing off the walls, he or she, and saying, you know, we want to do some behavioral modification. And yes, we do want to do some behavioral modification, but what if we could, and this is what I love about dietitians, right? What if we could look back down the chain and solve the internal problem first?
Yes. And I think this has been such a defining moment in our profession
Mhm.
because, yes, we know 70% of chronic diseases are related to nutrition. And before, as you mentioned, the behavior is what would be treated when you go into a pediatrician's office. A lot of people like to resort to prescription medication. And again, there's a time and place for that. But
Mhm.
we also know, what if you do all of these things first, and nutrition always comes up. And I love that we can be a part of that discussion, because why not start there?
Mhm.
And then in many cases, as you know, it's a light bulb moment. And the parents and caregivers and teachers and whoever works with children will say, wow, like it's a completely different child.
Mhm.
And all one had to do was take out certain things and add in certain things. And we can talk about those things as well.
Yeah. Before we do that, I want to tell you a story that I know, and then I want you to be thinking while I'm talking about, because I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, about like, give us a mini case study of like somebody who came to you, and sort of not specifically what you did, but what was the result. And I'm going to tell you one of mine because I referred the brother of a client of mine to a dietitian
Oh,
because
interesting.
he was having lots of meltdowns. This is
Mhm.
a 5-year-old boy. Lots of meltdowns, lots of trouble with transitions,
Mhm.
lots of rigidity in his
Mhm.
behavior, um, and just kind of couldn't keep it together.
Mhm.
Sleep was okay, maybe not as quality as we wanted it to be. But overall, he was kind of this high maintenance person,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
Parents were doing all the environmental modifications that I always ask parents to do. They had a really solid routine.
Mhm.
They were getting him to bed early. They were giving him heads up for transitions. They weren't doing extra outings. Everything, all the externals that we could change were being changed.
Mhm.
I sent him to the dietitian. The
Mhm.
dietitian did what dietitians do. She did the blood work. She recommended some supplements, which I'm not going to describe in detail here because this is very bio-individual, meaning
Mhm.
specific to a person. Yeah.
Yes.
Within 9 days
Mhm.
of taking the supplements that the dietitian recommended, this child has had almost no meltdowns.
Mhm.
But more importantly, he's turned into a happy, low maintenance person.
Yes.
It's like, and he's still himself. This is the other piece, right? That's so fun and interesting. But it is dramatic, and nothing else has changed.
Yes.
So
Yep.
that's my story about how powerful dietitians can be in a child's world. Do you have
Yeah.
one as well?
So having worked in clinical, I mean, we've seen extreme cases. We've seen what we call frequent flyers. So children who keep coming back to the hospital because it's recurring illness and they're on so much medication. And so when you're working with children like that, sometimes it's difficult because when you work with kids, you're not just talking about the child, you're talking to the whole family.
Mhm.
So I used to think, well, it's common sense and one should know, but really you are educating the entire family, the entire community.
Mhm.
And so yes, so there are kids that would come in, they've been on medication for a long time. And I say kids because there are just so many examples that I could name, having
Mhm.
worked in both spheres. And there are things right away. We were like, well, as a dietitian, nutrition, we need to eat every single day. Let's look at what your child is putting in their body, right? Because we know behavior is just manifesting as a result of what's happening inside the body.
Mhm.
So that's where I love to come in and dig deep. And then, of course, you find out certain things. And the thing with ADHD, the thing with highly sensitive kids, I mean, most kids, a lot of the things we can talk about applies to all the children, right? I feel like children, again, there are these hits that come at them. Their resilience, cellular resilience is lower than it's ever been. And it's not their fault. It's just there's a lot of factors that are going on. So that's where where I say it's harder to be a parent than ever before,
Mm.
is because of that. And then especially with kids with ADHD, with autism, highly sensitive children who may not have been diagnosed, those are the kids you really, you have to almost be more extreme
Mhm.
in the things that they're putting in their body, the things that they're putting on their body, and then the things that you work with them on the routine and sleep and mindfulness and stress.
Mhm.
because it all causes them to just pour over all the time because their baseline is already, extremely high.
Well, and that's so interesting. Yeah. And you and I, we like each other for this reason, but we think very similarly about this. If we think about the child, any person,
Mhm.
as a system,
Yes.
right, as a constellation of systems that are functioning as a whole organism, that organism has a total capacity, a total bandwidth.
Yes.
And what I hear you saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what I hear you saying is babies are coming into the world and their overall capacity tank
Mhm.
for like resilience
Yes.
is already partially filled
Mhm.
before they even arrive on the planet.
That's perfectly said. Exactly.
And so now we're asking them to do what humans have done for millennia, which is respond and in a resilient fashion to the environment around them, but they're already coming with a full tank. And so any number of things, can we talk about sugar in a second?
Yes, we're going to talk about all of those
Fantastic.
things. Yeah.
So sugar in the environment, for example, or in their food, for example, just like puts them over the edge
Mhm.
into this clinical set of behaviors. And now we're labeling behavior like you're hyperactive. Well, okay, no, we just kind of reached the end of your threshold for everything that's happening inside of you.
Yes, exactly. So, and people will say, well, people used to eat that stuff all the time and it was fine. Well, that is a difference though, as that threshold is different now.
Yeah.
And of course, things in the environment are different, and the stress of parents. And so, the food industry, which, I've covered a lot of in my podcast, depending where you live in the world, the regulations are different and the involvement of government and whatnot. So our kids definitely who live in this country, you have to be more proactive and aware as a consumer, because if you don't know, unfortunately, your kid's behavior may show that they cannot actually tolerate a lot of the things that are coming at them.
So what are some things, what are some easy ones?
Okay.
Like parents are like, oh my God.
Yes, exactly. So, and as you know, my goal is respectful parenting, looking at the whole big picture. So let's talk about kind of the general, what I would recommend everyone to pay more attention to. And then we can talk specifically about ADHD children. But you mentioned sugar, that's huge, but just processed food. I mean, I think people really underestimate just how processed our food is. And it's, unfortunately, everything in our food system, there's exposure to pesticide. Even if you eat organic, there could be cross contamination. But this isn't a doom and gloom conversation. This is strictly about information. And so processed foods, if your kid is eating that all the time, all day, every day, yes, it's hit after hit after hit, right?
And we're talking
Sugar.
processed food like being, I think of it, tell me how you think of it, as anything that comes in a package.
Yes. And anything that doesn't look like that in nature, right? So it's undergone multiple processes from nature to when it gets into your hand. So just think about how many hands have handled that particular food to land on your table, your countertop, your pantry. So that's number one. Sugar is huge. Unfortunately, the sugar industry has found a way to get into everything. So pasta sauce, for example, is a great example. I'll even have people say, well, it doesn't taste sweet. Okay, but let's look at the label. And so this brings me to my next point. Label reading, I feel, is an essential life skill. If you can work with a qualified professional, even reach out to me, just the basics. We're not asking you to be food scientists or food marketers, but just understand what a label is, because we can't avoid processed foods, right? But we could make better choices. And that's something I love to teach kids about. Okay, you have two things. How do you make that better choice, right? Because we want to also encourage autonomy and independence, but we know it's everywhere. I'm always overwhelmed by the amount of information. So label reading is huge, right? So just looking at what's in the ingredients, right? Because the front of the label, they want you to purchase the package. They want you to grab it off the shelf. It's very deceiving. And there's no way anyone would even know, like heart health, for example, could still have like 20 teaspoons of sugar. It's like if you eat 2 bowls of that cereal, right?
Right.
So look at the label.
Yeah.
So important. And again, I'm happy to come back and maybe do a label teaching class, or people
be
can reach
fun.
out to me and I can just do a label 101. Number 2, artificial dyes and additives. This is so huge. And I will say there is absolutely no room in a child's diet for any of those things. I understand they're everywhere. I mean, my kids will get exposed to it at sports and birthday parties and really everywhere outside of the home, but I do not buy those things in my house. The artificial dyes, I mean, studies have been done right away. It's linked to hyperactivity, inattention. You can talk to teachers and they'll say, wow, the attention span of children compared to ever before is lower. Right. So there are things happening. And
I'm going to pause you there, because
Yes.
lots of people watching this, maybe not lots of people who are watching this right now, but many people in the world will say, well, again, back to this, well, I grew up
Yes.
eating whatever, drinking Gatorade, for example, which is like, why is it that those
Yes.
colors? I have no idea.
Yes.
And
Shouldn't be.
I was fine. And the answer to that, nobody has to be wrong here, is I think what I want to say about this, because if you're saying that, and I was fine, it's because your system had the capacity
Yes.
to absorb that and function anyway.
Yes.
And again, when we've got modern children who have modern biomes and whatever else is working against them in the environments, there are going to be some kids who, yeah, they can handle a Gatorade every so often and without ill effect. And then there are going to be kids who can handle 0 Gatorade.
Yes.
And I'm not picking on Gatorade in particular, except that
But that's a great example of a commonly consumed product. But here is what is telling. A lot of these food dyes and artificial ingredients that we allow in our foods, especially marketed to children, are banned in Europe, for example. And those foods will actually come with a disclaimer, like this food may cause hyperactivity and attention. So that itself, we know, right? If it's banned in other places, then it should be also banned here. Yeah. So this is why for me, that's almost a non-negotiable. If I can remove one thing from our foods, it's the artificial stuff, because we don't need it. There's absolutely no nutrition benefits, but it's more harmful than hurtful.
That's interesting. So colorants, anything, color, preservatives, those are the big ones, yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
So as a whole, we want to cut out or reduce sugar, but we want to cut out as much as possible the food dyes and the artificial stuff. And again, that goes back to label reading. Don't buy it in the home, because if it's not in the home, your kids cannot access it. I can't tell you how many people I talk to. They're like, but I have it in a cupboard. It becomes a power struggle. You almost can never win against your children, right? Because they will wear you down. And then you want to be a great role model. So we just don't have it in the home. If you're hungry, you can go reach for whatever choices that I offer you, right? We cannot make children eat. Again, part of the Ellen Satter division of responsibility, she's the feeding expert, is you as a parent, especially when your kids are younger, can offer those choices to your child. And it is their job to choose which foods to eat. So as long as you're offering the better options, the healthier options, I'm going to put that in air quotes because that word gets thrown around a lot.
And you know what, I want to name this too, because this has become, like so many things in our culture, sort of polarized, right? It's like, sort of believing that, some food is okay and some food is not okay. That's, I hope that nobody walks away with that sense from this conversation, but it is, particularly as regards, again, kids with ADHD or any kind of sort of hypersensitivity to their environment. Yes. This is just like, this is low hanging fruit. This is easy, in air quotes, right? An easy way to not have to punish kids quite as much, because when they're set up for success nutritionally, sort of biologically, then they don't have to resort to behavior.
And everyone wins, right?
And everybody
Every
wins.
single person
and you
wins.
get to feel like a great parent.
Yes. Yeah. And so speaking of those kids, so I know people hear the word variety, right? We're going to get away from moderation for a bit, but just having variety in your diet. Most of us don't have enough variety in our foods. So exposure is so important from the time they're young. Well, people say, well, my kid won't eat, but that's okay. But you can still offer, right? It's our job just to offer and educate our kids. It's their job to choose, but we still want to have that micro exposure over time. Because again, we're role models. We're saying, this is what I want for you. These are the things we want to have outside of the home. And so you're teaching your kids to, okay, if I'm going to a birthday party, for example, I'm going to have a nice, nutritious lunch at home. I'm not going to go to the birthday party hungry, where there might be not the best choices. And then that's where you fill up. And then, of course, you're going to expect to see the behaviors. And again, then everyone loses.
Now, I'm going to jump in again.
Yeah.
Sometimes modern life
Yes.
demands a drive-through at McDonald's.
Yes.
And what I would say about that, I'm curious to see what you would say about that, is then we're setting ourselves up for, okay, I know that this is what I'm doing. I know I like my reason for doing it in the moment. And I also am going to give my kids some leeway when their body responds to what I've allowed them to put in, right? So to your point about the birthday party, if my kid is having a sugar rush because they had a massive piece of cake, it's fine. Nobody is here to be like, you shouldn't eat cake. You have to restrict the sun. No,
right.
Just understand that that's what you're going to get afterwards.
And maybe make a good choice for dinner, for example, right? Because you still have an entire day.
Right. Exactly.
So you may not want to have them skip a meal and then go to bed hungry, because then the next day you're going to see the ramifications of that day. So it's just about making choices throughout the day. It's just more about being mindful, right? So there's that word, including, and grocery.
Oh no, I lost you for a second. I'm going to press pause.
Okay. So if you've been to a birthday party where, maybe there were not the best choices for your child, but you still have dinner, that's where you want to sort of make up for the rest of the day. And that's totally okay. But again, it's about being mindful and intentional in your choices and the exposure that your children have.
Are there, besides food options, do you use supplements? And I'm not going to ask you about specifics because, again, you've got a toolkit that you know how to use and we don't. But do you do supplements, particularly for kids with ADHD?
Yeah. So as a baseline, I do like a multivitamin. I think most kids don't have enough variety. I have yet to meet a child, including my own children, that you could put a plate of wonderful greens and they're just munching away, especially with my younger child. So I like a daily multivitamin just to sort of, you have that, right? It doesn't hurt, but again, you want to look for a good quality one. That's really important. That's another big industry. You want to know that it's been third-party tested and that it comes from a good manufacturer. And so what your kids, again, are putting in your body is something like, that's what they tell you is what you're getting. And I'm happy to recommend brands off record or through private messaging.
Perfect. And we're going to actually, I think, given time, we're going to have you back. We're going to wrap it here. If people want to get a hold of you, how do they do that?
I'm all over social media. Babystepsnutrition.com is my website, but you can also reach out to me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, all under, it's Baby Steps Nutrition Podcast, but you'll see the little logo with the ladder. And I have lots of information there, lots of interviews, but again, you can reach out to me for specific questions.
Fantastic. Argavan, we'll have you back for the label reading class. I
would love to.
I'm all in.
I would love to. It's so important.
Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Take
This
care.
was wonderful. Bye-bye.